Contingency Contract 9 Deepness is soon upon us, releasing on December the 8th. This video will firstly cover the map design paradigms as well as the differences from other CCs, then move on to the map analysis as well as enemy pathing, followed by operator analysis in both a risk 18 and high risk context, before moving on to specific strategies that has been tested to work in the CN servers. Lastly, we'll take a look at some fun gimmicks in this map, as well as how you can use them to your advantage. The CC9 homework sheet made by me, Squiddy Bear and Clever Shadow is also available now at the link in the description, so feel free to check that out. First off, the map design. Unlike CC6, which was a mix of Arginium Dust as well as Gavir Returns, CC9 is entirely based on the enemies of Undertines, with almost all of them making an appearance except for the final boss, San Quintus Bishop. This necessitates that, along with CC8, this CC places a very heavy emphasis on sanity damage, which is a relatively new mechanic in the grand scheme of things. There's also a greater variety of risks for you to choose in CC9, with around 6 additional risks both in week 1 and week 2, adding up to 33 and 39 for week 1 and week 2 max risk respectively. Starting off, the map has initially spawned egg crawlers, which are positioned around the map. These can be modified by risks, and if you don't take any of the additional egg crawler risks, then only the initial ones in the middle would appear. These enemies have 0 defense, however every time a single threshold of their health is reached, they explode, dealing massive amounts of arts damage and sanity damage to operators in a vicinity of 2 tiles around them. As such, they are one of the main threats of this CC, allowing for long-ranged damage dealers to be exceptional. These sea crawlers serve as the basic mobs of the stage, dealing a small percent of the attack as sanity damage. With risk scaling, every normal mob becomes very dangerous, however this is exponentiated in this map given that there's 6 additional risks compared to other CCs. After that, the flowers appear that move on the top lane towards the blue box in an S pattern. These enemies are ranged, however they do not deal a percentage of their attack as sanity damage. Following that, the first Basin Sea Reaper spawns, which are passive enemies that move very slowly until they take damage, in which case they start sprinting towards the blue box at a pretty high speed whilst dealing sanity damage to all operators within its vicinity. Soon after, the first FTT spawns, which is an acronym for the first to talk. This is a ranged mini-boss with the passive that it deals 40% of its attack as sanity damage on its regular attacks, as well as an ability every 20 seconds that locks onto one operator and the 4 tiles around it in the cardinal directions, dealing a large amount of physical and sanity damage to them. During the skill, he also becomes invulnerable. He is yet followed by another Sea Reaper before he starts moving in the same path as the Sea Reapers. A reminder that this is not representative of your clear, as many of you might have already started attacking the Sea Reapers, therefore allowing them to move much further than the first to talk. In addition, more Sea Crawlers spawn in the central red box, and a secondary first to talk will spawn in the upper red box, heading along the same path as the basic ranged mobs. By the time the second FTT moves to the blue box, the map is essentially over, with the rest of the enemies just slowly crawling their way to the blue box if you haven't killed them already. Now that we've seen the map and the enemy pathing, let's look at some key positional paradigms that we may employ to help us deal with the map easier. First off, note that the eggs in the top left are basically isolated from the rest of the map, and therefore 1 to 2 operators to take care of them from a long range may be pretty decent if you have enough DP at the start. Another threat to consider might be the eggs that spawn from the central red box. However, as they move pretty slowly towards the blue box, which is a rather isolated area, many may consider using defenders which have very low attack to block these enemies and therefore hold them there until the rest of the map is cleared. Additionally, this tactic also works for the Basin Sea Reapers, as you recall they are passive without being attacked first, so if you have a defender stalling an egg and the Reaper stops on that defender, well, he'll just stand there and do nothing. Therefore, stalling is an integral part of the map, however it is balanced much more nicely into the map itself, allowing you to dynamically deal with the other threats whilst also focusing on the stalling of certain elements. To this end, the only enemy that cannot be stalled is the first to talk, at least by conventional metrics. However, one might notice that both of them do stop for a brief moment at the tile in the top right, and it may be a consideration to stall the first one until the second one arrives and then burst them down together. Another key thing to think of is just to straight up leak one of them, because the HPC risk is only risk 1 and you are provided with 3, which they take 2 of. That's also an easy segue into the other properties of the map, in which it starts you off with 10 initial deployment points and a base deployment limit of 9. Note that the initial deployment points of 10 allows you to get a potential 6 Psylocke onto the map immediately. However, if you don't have a potential 6, then an Elysium or Myrtle might be the better opener. Looking at the enemy density in the pathings, we probably don't want to set up to the left of the map, given that very few enemies actually go that area, and if we do, we'll be split between the top and the bottom. As such, the obvious setup points for your operators will be in this area marked right here, with your ranged units maybe occupying the central tiles up here. You're also forced to put some units in the top left to deal with the 4 sea crawlers, of which you must at least kill 1 before attempting to stall it if you're going for that type of strategy. These ranged tiles here, however, might generally be bait given that they are all in the vicinity of the Sea Reaper's sanity damage over time range, and as you saw earlier with how many of them are on the map, it may not be the most viable strategy to place your ranged operators there permanently, if at all. Another key area of consideration to set up your operators in is at the topmost of the map where there's 3 to 4 melee tiles. It is relatively cut off from the rest of the map such that you may attempt to kill the Sea Reapers there without endangering your setup at the bottom, whilst simultaneously using long range units such as Ashlock to attack the eggs on the left or even the central area at the bottom. Finally, if you're deploying your operators in the bottom section, this tile is phenomenal for elemental medics given that it can basically reach everyone. As always though, I recommend you look into the map yourself and try to find new strategies that I have not mentioned here. That's half of the fun of Arknights after all. Next up, I'll be mentioning some key operators which interact well with this map and my recommendations on how to use them effectively. It's a bit late to start raising operators specifically for this contingency contract, but at least this might help you to decide what to put up on friend support and the like. Prior to that, however, we must also consider the risks which interact with the deployment cost of certain classes, even more so in this CC. These are the 4 risks that are available from the get-go in week 1, and you can see that they're incredibly potent. The first at R1 doubles the DP cost of all vanguards and defenders, with the second one doubling the DP cost of all medics and supporters, all of which are incredibly instrumental classes in this CC. Looking at R2, however, the all-runs seem like a joke. You are forced to pick between all melee units having triple DP cost or all ranged units having triple DP cost. This basically screws ranged units for the CC entirely, given that there is still DP risks in place such that you must have multiple vanguards in the squad to even stand a chance in beating this CC. Therefore, at the higher risk levels, ranged units are basically not seen at all. It's incredibly unfortunate from a variety perspective, but at least it shakes up the meta in a meaningful way such that it isn't just Black Knight Gnosis and Chowder abuse. Speaking of risks, there's another set of risks that we haven't seen which modify how you play the map by a large amount. One of them is R2, all allies have 40% increased SP cost, and the other is R1, all allies have 30% less SP recovery. Added together, this basically halves the skill cycle for all operators, and even supposed heli drops like Silverash aren't safe, given that the wait time to activate his skill from heli drop is increased from 15 seconds to a patently absurd 73 seconds. I think I've straight tangential to the topic for a bit long however, so let's move on to the operators. In the guard category, we only really have Surtur, Irene, and NTRK. Surtur is the premier guard of the CC and continues to dominate as an insanely strong unit. She can hit the FTTs from outside their attack range, making her the choice for bursting them down with above squad. Furthermore, she also outranges the eggs at the tip of her skill 3 range, making her a decent choice when positioned correctly. She's a solid risk 18 carry and also scales right up to risk 38. Irene, on the other hand, is an option that works pretty well in the low to mid risks with her skill 3 that immobilizes the eggs by lifting them airborne before dealing damage. In case you didn't know, the eggs do not explode when they are stunned, slapped, frozen, or airborne, so Irene manages to nuke them down for a sizable portion of their health without having to worry about the retaliatory damage. No, the Radiant Knight is generally just used as a glorified red in that she has a pretty fat stun on deployment, but also manages to deal a pretty decent amount of damage with her skill 2. She's mainly used to target the Reapers, given that she can get 2 to 3 hits off before she's immobilized by the sanity damage, which may be all you need in conjunction with the stun. She's pretty decent in low to mid risk as a non-central addition to your squad, as well as a key corner piece of dealing with the Reapers in the higher risks. Onto defenders, we have Horn, Zarya, Blemenshine, and any pure defender. I'm sure all of you expected Horn to be here as soon as I mentioned dealing damage from a long range. She's the premier option for that, reaching absurd amounts of damage with her skill 3, especially given that she scales relatively poorly with defense and the eggs have practically none of that. Skill 2 is also viable given that the skill cycle is much faster and you can instantly activate it, dealing a huge burst of damage as soon as the overdrive is activated. In addition, it is less reliant on Horn's revive passive that grants her attack speed as opposed to skill 3. She's incredibly strong in low risks as a main DPS option and remains the premier egg killer in the higher risks. Trailing quite far behind her are Zarya and Blemenshine. Zarya is used exclusively for her skill 3, which is excellent for stalling the Reapers as well as the FTTs, whilst also buffing the damage of other arts units in mainly Surtur. Blemenshine on the other hand is excellent for stalling the eggs, given that her skill 2 allows her to damage them while they are sleeping and therefore they will not explode by doing so. Any relatively low level 3-block defender also works wonders here, given that the eggs do not attack, so you don't really care about the tankiness of your own operators. You only really care about them not triggering the threshold of the eggs explosions, to which they do fairly well unless you are stalling them for hours and hours. It's highly recommended, however, to not stall the map in Risk 18, as there's very little point in doing so given that you can just kill them all directly, so the low level defender stalling strategy is only reserved for high risk. Moving on to casters, we have Golden Glow, Ifrit, Passenger, and Eyjafjallajökull, essentially all of the 6 stars. Golden Glow and Ifrit are both phenomenal given their high range, either through skills or just naturally, which allows them to take care of the threats far away from them. In addition, both of them have high natural DPS, which works wonders in the low risks. Passenger is a decent complementary DPS option, especially given the slow on skill 3, as well as the potential for it to be relatively far ranged, and Eyjafjallajökull's skill 3 when positioned properly can nuke half of the map. However, these are only really viable in the low risks, given that in the higher risks, you are forced to pick between the ground units and the range units, in which case you'll definitely be forced to pick the ground units as you have DP generation problems otherwise. A similar problem before snipers, but that doesn't stop them from being the absolute kings of low risk. On the surface level, Chowder's range might seem a bit small for the eggs. She does have the range extension on skill 3, allowing her to clip the eggs without them exploding near her. Fartooth and Shroud are decent for the same reason Ifrit is, and there's also a decent straightaway on the map such that they can do work against the Reapers when they're charging towards them. Firewatch on the other hand just says, fuck the Reapers, I'm not taking damage because I'm invisible with skill 1. The real star of the show though is just generic anti-air snipers ranging from Cruz, Adachnil all the way to Exusiai. They crush the sea crawlers from a very far range and they're easily accessible to nearly every player given that the game forces you to build them at around chapter 4 to chapter 5. Obviously they also don't really scale well into high risk, but they earn a very solid position as the low risk carries. Vanguards continue to be ubiquitous in CCs, with all of them making very strong appearances. The weakest of which might be Black Knight relative to prior CCs, however this is more of a result of the DP risk cucking her. The others, like Bagpipe and Flag, remain the premier choices in any CC, and there's really not much to talk about them. The one operator specific comment is probably about Psylocke, given that she only exists for skill 1 on this map. In higher risks, it matters her over Elysium, given that the attack speed allows Surtur to get extra attacks off. However, in lower risks, if you don't have a potential 6 Psylocke, and Elysium skill 1 M3 is likely significantly better. However, Elysium skill 2 is still used in a variety of clears, so there's also that to consider. Moving on to medics, well, you can kind of see for yourself. There is elemental damage, so in the lower risks, elemental medics are good. However, in the higher risks, elemental medics aren't able to sustain the flow of sanity damage that comes in from the Reapers as well as the egg explosions, so generally people just try to avoid these mechanics and skip the elemental medics altogether. Couchstead of course is usable at the lower risks, but it's not really something too special worth mentioning. Onto the stars of the show, the specialists. Phantom and Kafka are both used extensively for skill 3's store abilities, which work amazingly well against the Reapers, which you definitely want to control the position of at all times. In addition, they can also be used to cycle the FTT, such that with redeployment pods as well as enough specialists, you can get FTT to never move. Lee is a fairly decent option at the lower risks, given that he can avoid stuns using his passive, and you can straight up put him against elemental damage against the Reapers or the eggs and have him just murder everything, assuming you have enough deployment points. Gladia's skill 3 has multiple unique interactions with the map, which I'll mention at the end of the video, but suffice to say that she alongside Weedy are used to position the eggs together such that you can deal damage to them more effectively. In particular, Gladia is used on the top right to group the 4 eggs into one tile, such that something like Surtur might be able to damage them, alongside Weedy, who is used to reposition the eggs spawning from the central red box into one tile. Finally, we have the king of Surtur buffing in the specialist class, Ark. The 50% attack speed he provides to Surtur is so significant that even though there is a ×3 DP cost for ranged units, he is still used in the higher risks to provide Surtur the extra oomph she needs. Last but not least, we have supporters, of which there's 3 notable mentions: Ling, Suzerain, and Magellan. Ling is just a general low risk carry, and of course, well, Ling just does Ling things. There's not a ton to say. Suzerain and Magellan is where it gets slightly more interesting, given that the Reapers are incredibly dangerous to your ranged units and their main form of offense is their speed as well as the damaging dot around them. Suzerain's slow helps to control them effectively as well as line up certain Reapers which may not be activated for a singular burst cycle. Of course, she can also be used to slow down the eggs, to line up the first attacks, and to amplify the damage on them. She's just generally an incredibly versatile unit, and similar to Ark, is also used through the ×3 supporter cost risk in the higher risks. Magellan, on the other hand, is a much more specialized version of Suzerain, and is much more suitable for the high risks where you're able to plan out these intricate strategies. She's used to store the Reapers as well as the first attacks such that they line up together so you can burst them together, and overall is about the same effectiveness as Suzerain. Now let's take a look at specific clears from the risk 18 to max risk range, courtesy of the CC9 homework sheet, and analyze the key concepts used in these runs. Looking at this R18 run featuring Surtur carry, the entire combination of Rangers, Adechinil, Catapult, and Cruise are enough to take care of the trash mobs as well as to deal damage to the eggs, allowing them to all die before the first attack actually spawns. Then it abuses fast redeploy to store the Reapers for a brief duration whilst allowing them to run the full duration of the track, which due to the low risk nature of the map allows them to kill themselves due to their self-degeneration. Surtur is then subsequently back up again for the second first attack, which is easily killed with a little aid from Gravel. Surtur just makes everything too easy, so let's look at an R18 with Passenger as the solo 6-star carry. This run starts off the same way as the last one, with anti-air snipers, Cruise, and Meteor dealing with the eggs as well as the early mobs. Then Passenger is placed on the rightmost tile in preparation to deal with the eggs as well as the Reapers, given that his slow on skill 3 as well as the massive range is incredibly effective. However, an elemental medic such as Honeyberry, Chestnut, or Mulberry is required to keep Passenger alive, otherwise he'll get stunned by the howl from the Reapers, and subsequently the stage will lose its only damage dealer. Passenger then really shows off his potential with the use of Thermal EX and 2 casts of skill 3 to instantly kill the first attack. From these 2 clears, it's fairly simple what the basic risk 18 loadout for a low rarity composition is. You take your entire snipers to kill the eggs and then have one big DPS unit to take care of the 2 first attacks, which can have a ton of variety. Next, let's move on to something more esoteric and look at risk 38 clears, which were the maximum achieved for the CC, even though risk 39 is the theoretical maximum. Here we have a risk 38 clear by Project Ark, and the differences are incredibly stark. For starters, the trash mobs at the start can't be killed by conventional means, and it requires a Weedy cannon to stun them. This, along with Weedy skill 3, allows you to push the 2 initial eggs spawning by the central red box into one tile just on the edge of Surtur's range, such that Surtur may kill them with skill 3. Then they utilize the passive damage from the Sea Reapers in order to kill Horn once and activate her passive, giving her a lot more attack speed, to which she then activates skill 3 to bombard the eggs on the left corner. Magellan is then used to delay the first attack so that it lines up with the second first attack spawning at the top right corner, whilst Ark is used to buff Surtur, and Psylocke is placed along Surtur in order to further increase her attack speed. Then Silfresh is used to reveal the first attacks which are invisible after a risk, which is then stored by Magellan skill 1 and Phantom skill 3 for an arced Surtur to kill them effectively. Then the rest of the map focuses on using fast redeploys such as Kafka and Phantom to store the Sea Reapers, whilst using defenders such as Blemenshine and Noyakon to store the eggs. Finally, they line up all of the eggs that are moving to the bottom blue box, with Horn and Ark such that they may all be killed in one fell swoop. As for max risk, Rhine Lab, a CN group, is planning to try it on the Japanese server when it releases, and EN groups such as Lamung Dragons are reportedly also attempting it with their own strategies. Who knows, maybe by the time you're watching this video, Risk 39 would have already been cleared. Earlier on in the video, I mentioned talking about some more obscure mechanics which are specific to CC9 and have strong interactions with aforementioned operators. Now I'd like to elaborate on that in more detail. Firstly, Gladia, who is a special girl that have two mechanics working well in this CC. If you have an enemy that is back or side blocked to her, in the sense that she is not able to actively attack them with her skill 3, and you keep on spamming that skill 3, she'll have the animation of skill 3 but not actually cast it. This solves the issue of defenders, even though they have very low attack, still dealing a minute amount of damage to the eggs, such that there's still a timer waiting for the eggs to explode eventually. Gladia solves all of that because she'll keep on attempting to cast skill 3 over and over and over, making it the perfect stalling strategy for the eggs. In addition, her skill 3 has another bug in that it doesn't actually trigger the egg's explosion when it is cast, so you could use the whirlpool to group the eggs together without worry that they'll one-shot her. Next up, we have another bug related to the explosions of the eggs. Chowter, alongside other operators which may have enough damage to instantaneously burst through 2 thresholds of the explosion of the egg, do not actually trigger any explosions, which is why you see interesting clears of Chowter straight up decimating the eggs at close range yet not getting killed. However, this isn't really relevant in high risk due to high DP cost on Chowter herself and the necessity to pick the triple DP risk on ranged units. This last one isn't really an unintended mechanic, but just something that not many people might know. If you sleep an enraged Sea Reaper with Kafka or any other sources of sleep, they'll actually still take their self-immolation damage through the sleep, which may be invaluable in stalling strategies. As always, questions are welcome in the comments where I'll try to reply within 1 to 2 hours, and I wish you all the best in clearing Contingency Contract 9 Deepness.